So this is Just Listen, providing emotional support to survivors of sexual violence. Here are our objectives for today. First, we're going to identify the foundational skills of advocacy. Then we're going to define the various advocate responses and responsibilities when providing emotional support. After that, we will discuss the various phrases to use when providing that emotional support. Then we will review the principles of safety and trigger planning. After that, we will explore the different types of grounding tools and techniques. Then we're going to examine different healing modalities before finally wrapping up and practicing empathetic and active listening. So now we're going to review the foundational skills of advocacy, and then we're going to really delve into how these different pieces affect how we provide emotional support. Emotional support is a key part of sexual violence advocacy. When we talk about the role of a sexual violence advocate, we highlight it as one of those core skills and roles that the others build on. All the other types of advocacy build on being able to provide someone with emotional support and to connect with them on a basic level. Especially with COVID, the way survivors have been able to access that support has shifted, and this in itself can be very overwhelming for folks. We know that as advocates, but it can feel very overwhelming to wear a mask and to also deal with the anxiety about getting sick, amongst other concerns. With that being said, we need to be able to provide quality emotional support to survivors. Often, when sexual violence survivors are asked what they need, the first thing they say is that they wanted someone to believe them, listen to them, and tell them that it wasn't their fault. Okay, it looks like some folks are not able to see the ASL interpreters. But some folks are. So maybe change your gallery view and that might be able to help. Okay. If not, we will pause and try to make sure that that's working as well. Emotional support consists of showing empathy. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Brené Brown, you probably are, but she says, empathy is the ability to feel with someone, not for someone. We also have to be able to communicate effectively when we provide emotional support. And that includes things beyond just talking really quickly or spitting out resources or giving out quick solutions. It also means that the advocate knows how to discuss short and long-term healing and can also assist in helping survivors with forming a safety plan. It also means that advocates who are skilled in providing emotional support have vast knowledge of different healing modalities and how to access them. Thank you. And our ASL interpreter said, in order to access ASL interpreters, you may switch your view to gallery view. Thank you so much. So the first foundational skill of advocacy is to assess and respond. We need to make sure that we are processing what survivors are telling us, but make sure that we are also doing so in a calm and regulated way that is still empathetic and trauma-informed. We also need to be able to assess for multiple options. And this really is just building on those crisis intervention skills we should already have. Advocates need to be able to assess the situation quickly and empathetically, while also being really ready to reevaluate with each new piece of information. Sexual violence advocates also know the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting relies on impulse and without much consideration, while responding means to take the time to listen and reflect with thoughtfulness, reason, and understanding. advocates are also skilled in assessing tones, whether that's our own or the person receiving services. We need to make sure that we are constantly checking our tone. We should be observing things about ourselves and what changes we notice in our bodies when we aren't calm or focused or feeling very empathetic at the moment. For me, I know that my tone and my pacing are the first things to fluctuate or change when I'm becoming upset or dysregulated. I speak much faster than normal and my pitch goes up several octaves, but I know that my breathing also quickly becomes really shallow. So I try to pay attention to those things especially. So please answer this question in the chat, our first chat question of the day. What are some things that happen in your body when you're not calm? When you're not calm, what are some of the things that you notice? Fidgeting, nervous, anxious, my heart rate goes up, I hold my breath, it's hard to breathe, I feel tense, my heart speeds up. Oh, you all are very interactive today. I can't even read all of these so fast. My chest feels tight, clenching up, my palms sweat, my palms get sweaty, rapid breathing. Thank you. And so it sounds like that you all are at least a little bit in touch with your body. So you're aware of these different responses your body has to your different feelings. For me, I also noticed that naturally my voice is pretty high pitched and I speak quickly. So I consciously try to lower my tone and slow my pace when I'm speaking with survivors. My mom used to always say to me, it isn't always what you say, but how you say it. And that's really important for us to remember when working with survivors. We have to be able to be aware and check in with how our body is responding to the distressing environment around you and be conscious of how our response may further traumatize those in our environment. Listening, it may be the most important skill of a sexual violence advocate, and it's critical to providing emotional support. Even if a survivor isn't sure what they need, doesn't want referrals, and doesn't want to sign up for our services, we can still listen. Particularly with sexual violence survivors, some of their needs aren't as tangible as formalized. So survivors may have a difficult time articulating or figuring out what their needs are and how those needs fit into our services. And the only way we're really going to know is if we listen, confirm, and repeat back, listen again, and then maybe after repeating this process a few more times, offering options and resources. Another key part of listening that's related to empathy is patience and understanding. To be able to provide individualized support that survivors need, we have to listen and listen deeply. Each of these aspects is a part of the piece of providing emotional support, which then turns into those different types of advocacy, like medical advocacy or court accompaniment, or any of those other types. So please answer this question in the chat. What are some nonverbal ways that you demonstrate that you're listening? Body posture, nodding, I lean in, eye contact, nodding my head. Yeah, that's a good nonverbal cue. I mean, it's still verbal, but we get the point. Eye contact, leaning forward. Eye contact again. Yeah, so again, these are some of these ways that we can demonstrate that we're listening even without saying anything. Silence, giving that person your full attention. Thank you all for answering. Mirroring physically, right? Like if someone is showing a certain face, maybe we try to mirror that, right? Because it helps people. We all have these mirror neurons, and Victoria knows a lot more about this. But when we are mirroring other people, it helps to calm and regulate us. So speaking of active listening, we're going to do an exercise now. So please turn your attention to the video. And remember to really focus on listening and observing. And let me know if you all can hear the video too.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just...
Whoops, okay. You all can hear it, good.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can't go on?
Okay. So just to test everyone's listening skills, we need to make, I have some questions prepared for you all to ask for the video. So first question, what was the problem in the video? And please answer these questions in the chat. What was the problem in the video? Trying to fix the situation instead of hearing her. She wasn't feeling heard. He wasn't listening. The person felt unheard. He wasn't listening, focused on the nail. He was not a good listener. Yeah. He was noticing her outward appearance rather than what was going on inside. Thank you all for really noticing. I was really hoping that no one would say the problem in the video was the nail, right? Because as we could see, that might not have been what the person with the nail thought was the issue. Second question, what did the person with the nail in their head think was the problem? Wasn't listening. He didn't understand, lack in listening. He wasn't listening to her, right? That was the person with the nail or the survivor's problem, right? They didn't feel heard throughout that whole interaction, right? He kept telling her, I think you should do this, or actually, but the problem is this, right? What did that person with the nail in their head need? What did they say that they needed? They weren't being heard, but they also really didn't know emotional support in the midst of the confusion and frustration, him to listen, someone to vent to. She felt pressure in her head, right? She just needed him to listen. He was trying to fix the problem and not listening. Great. Yeah, she said what she needed pretty clearly, right? She said, and all I need you to do is just listen. Okay, great. And last question, what did the other person say that you think was helpful to the person with the nail in their head? So after they got through, their initial conflict, what were some of the things that they said that were actually helpful? That sounded really hard. That must be hard. Yeah, the encouragement. What are some of the things that they might have did that helped that person? Validating their feelings, the empathy, acknowledging their pain, touch your hand, pausing to listen. You all got it, right? So remember, right? This was a silly example because it's very unlikely that someone would actually come to us with this situation. But it's not our job as advocates to tell survivors what we think the problem is or convince them of what we think the problem is. Our job is to listen and to provide them with support that they need and help them with the resources they've identified. Even in the video, when he didn't physically do anything to help her with the pain she was experiencing, we could see the relief in her body language and in her facial expressions and hear it in her tone and in her response when he said, that sounded really difficult. Remember, it's not about the nail, it's about what the survivor's needs are. And so I want to make it very plain and near the beginning of the webinar that there is no magical recipe to providing emotional support. Each survivor is different. So to meet their needs, you're going to have to try different and unique strategies for every survivor you work with. But you won't be able to provide them with anything if we're not able to stop what we're doing, focus in on the survivor, and listen. The main way we center survivors' experiences and their voices is by listening. Even if we're ultimately not able to help the survivor get what they need, even if they're upset, if we can do nothing else, we can listen. So now we're going to go into those advocate responses a little bit more. Advocates have to be able to give survivors their full attention when meeting with them, even if there's other things going on, which we know that there always is. We need to be able to switch our phones on silent or close down our computers or do whatever we need to do to let the survivor know that for however long we're meeting them, they are our only focus. We also need to practice empathy and active listening while also being calm ourselves. We know that survivors might express a lot of emotions when they're sharing with us, but we need to be able to be empathetic without taking on those emotions as our own. Even if we're dealing with things outside of work and with COVID, most of us probably are, maybe we can take 30 minutes between working with survivors to take care of some of those appointments, or we can go take a quick walk, or we can use some of our grounding tools to regulate ourselves. Or if we need more long-term support, we can only meet with survivors maybe 4 out of our 5-day schedule so we can take care of some of those other things on that last day. Or we can actually utilize some of our vacation days so we're not feeling overburdened by secondary trauma and compassion fatigue. Regardless of how we decompress, we need to take steps to be emotionally present, yet separate from the survivor's feelings. Advocates also have to be able to help survivors with emotional safety planning, and we'll really delve into that a little bit later. We need to make sure that when we're providing for support for survivors, we are checking for nonverbal and verbal cues. And you all talked about some of those cues that you noticed in the video. You identified some cues that you do. So we need to be checking for those with survivors. And I think there's a question actually in the chat, in the question box right now. Someone asked, what recommendations can you give us about demonstrating real listening if we're providing remote services by phone and by video? So this can be hard to notice over the phone, right? But we can also notice things like tone, right? We can notice things like the different volumes in people's voices. If they're talking really loudly and then they suddenly get very quiet, that's an indicator of different things. We can indicate that by saying like, you don't have to tell me right away, or we can stop and breathe. We can think about it. Just let me know when you're ready to start, right? That is different ways that can still convey that empathy and that emotional support, right? We never have to have all the answers, but sometimes just by being there, even if it's not physically, can be really helpful for survivors. We can also notice the survivor's tone or the pacing of their words, right? If they were talking pretty at an even pace that breaks, but then they start speeding up very quickly, that might be an indicator that something's changed in their environment. If we're in person, we can notice the survivor's change in body language and facial expressions. And again, those can be important indicators of someone's safety. We also want to make sure that we're assessing and listening to the survivor's environment. We know that survivor safety can change in an instant. So we have to be conscious of this and make sure we're checking in with those verbal prompts. So it might be like, I'm hearing a lot of noise in the background. Is now still a good time to talk? If we get disconnected, would you want me to call you back right away? These things can be important, and it also demonstrates to the survivor that we're observant and we're paying attention. Monitoring changes in behavior can look like how changing our response to how a survivor's change in environment and what they may need, depending on what they're feeling and what happened in their change in circumstances. We also want to make sure that we're actively listening and we're fully engaged. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we're validating their responses and their experiences. Similar to the question above, any additional thoughts on effective advocacy over chat? Yeah, so some chat can be a little bit harder because again, you can't see that person, you can't gauge their facial expressions. But if you're able to use emojis, that could be helpful to say like, I'm here to support you, smiley face, or what's coming up for you right now. Still leaves room for open-ended questions and for survivors to tell you what they need, and you can still convey that support. You can also always still say things like, I believe you, take your time, what do you want to share with me? And again, focusing on those open-ended questions and providing that validation. I love your all's questions. Please keep them coming. Okay. And then for ourselves, we really need to make sure that we're internally checking in and evaluating how we're delivering these services. We need to make sure that we're communicating effectively, not only through email and through passive communication forms like writing, but also that we're doing that face-to-face. We need to speak in a way that others understand, be open to providing further explanation, be ready to give and provide culturally responsive examples, and also be able to provide that follow-up and to check in with survivors. And this is going to look different for every person. And it really revolves around if the survivor feels like we communicated well. We also need to make sure that we're monitoring our nonverbal cues, right? How we think we look when we're to show that we're engaged might not translate the same way for survivors. So we need to be conscious of that too. We also have to be calm and regulated. And when we're not, we need to be able to communicate that effectively to our support team or to our supervisors so we can get that support that we need. We also have to be able to demonstrate choices with survivors and that there is safety in saying no, at least in our environment. Would you like the door open and closed? Would you like our appointments to be on a certain day, or would you like me to check up a little bit more randomly? Would you like to make this call together now or later? Do you feel like you need more information, or are you ready to make this decision? We should make sure that we're verbalizing all of these available choices because we don't want to lead survivors or feel like we led them into a decision that they made. All the decisions are their own. We also need to make sure that we're creating that sense of safety for survivors. And the best way to find out how to do that is to ask them directly. For some people, it might be having the door closed during sessions. For others, it might be calling and checking it at a very regimented time. For others, it might be sending texts. For others, it might be strictly calls. Safety looks and feels different for each person, and we need to realize that. And so we already touched on this a little bit, but COVID has had major impacts for survivors. It's changed a lot of our services, but it also slowed or halted some of the criminal legal processes throughout Arizona, which could affect survivors' abilities to get justice through that system. It's also negatively impacted a lot of survivors' finances, housing, and health, and maybe even some of their support systems and loved ones if they lost someone to COVID-19. So we can't forget that even as we're adjusting to our new quote unquote normal, how traumatic this can be on top of some of the trauma someone's already experienced. Survivors could be experiencing high levels of anxiety, grief, and many other emotions that exacerbate this already hard time. And this is just another reason why we need those virtual services, those phone and text lines, those virtual support groups, and all of these different formats that we can provide services. When these services are available, survivors still have a way to receive support when they may need it the most. And we're not really going to talk that much about virtual services today, but I did want to provide you all with a couple of examples for survivors to help spark and sustain connections while being distanced. So this could be virtual support groups, writing letters, whether that's physically or through different apps. There could be video chatting or scheduled phone calls with the people that they care about. And they can do virtual game nights and movie nights. I'm also going to shamelessly plug my coworkers, Marley, the one who's doing tech support for this webinar, and Lizette, because they are actually doing a webinar soon on virtual services. So be on the lookout for that. And if you have any other ideas about how survivors can connect, please put them in the chat. So now we're going to talk about emotional validation. So I'm going to take a moment to let everyone read this before I do, and take a moment to let it marinate a little bit. What were some things that a helper/professional did that a professional/helper said to you after you were sexually assaulted that did not help you feel better? They took the side of the detective who thought I was making up before and until they completed the forensics on my body in my home. I really want to emphasize again the power of what we say. When we do our jobs properly and support survivors, we can really build them up, but it's also really easy to tear someone down. And you know, it wouldn't be a webinar that I'm doing without a MENTometer. So at this moment, I would like everyone, and I invite everyone to please take out their phones and then go to www.menti.com and type in the code 66773846. And Marley is going to put a link for you all to go to in the chat. So please go to www.menti.com and type in the code 66773846. So give me a moment while I switch screens. Oh, and can you all still see it? Okay, great. You all can still see. Absolutely wonderful. Okay. So what are some things that you do to provide emotional support to survivors? Let them vent. I love that, right? Sometimes people just need to be listened to. Even if it's not going to be quote unquote productive, that can still be very helpful. Validate, believe, tell them what they need to, tell them that they can feel what they need to feel. Be attentive. Let them vent without interruption. Listen and reflect back so that they know I'm listening, right? That can be very helpful for folks. Snaps to validate what they're saying. I'm a big fan of snaps. Reframing what they said back to them to ensure clarity, believing them, don't judge them, not talking over them. Absolutely. Listen, I'm seeing a lot of listening and showing empathy. Let them talk about what's on their mind. Validating their experience. I listen to them as long as they need. Trying to make them comfortable before the conversation really starts, giving them blankets, comfortable clothes, food, coffee. Absolutely. What about some of those when you're virtual, right? When you're on your crisis line or your warm line, or you're providing that video advocacy? What are some of the things you all do? I like to make sure that the participants I said feel heard and understand that they did not deserve any of the fees they received or are receiving. Absolutely, validating their experiences. Thank you all for being very participatory today. Acknowledge that they are going through a difficult time, I think that says. Offering a listening ear, demonstrating empathy, guide them with resources. Great, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. And you all can keep putting your answers if you would like. All right. And just want to make sure that everyone can still see the screen. Thank you. So now we're gonna watch another video. And again, we really like to hear straight from survivors what's helpful to them. And so this is a survivor actually telling us about what was said and what's a validating phrase that we can use to validate survivors.
Now, before we dive in, I would love if you'd hit subscribe. I release videos every Sunday and Thursday about life in the aftermath of trauma, and I will be here talking about it. I would love to see you here back on this channel. The first thing that is really helpful to say to a survivor of trauma when they express what has happened or a piece of their story is really simple. Just, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I know that there is a lot of pressure to feel like you almost have to fix it. A lot of people have expressed that to me. I personally am a survivor of sexual assault and domestic violence, and I've had a lot of really good reactions and a lot of really bad reactions over the years when I have talked to people. And I found that one of the simplest, easiest things that I've ever heard is someone just respond back with, "Wow, I am so sorry." Acknowledging the pain that someone has gone through is a great place to start. Secondly, if you say the words, "I'm here to listen."
Sorry, everybody. Okay. Well, keep it, go back to the video, apologize. I think we're like right here.
I know that there is a lot of pressure to feel like you almost have to fix it. A lot of people have expressed that to me. I personally am a survivor of sexual assault and domestic violence, and I've had a lot of really good reactions and a lot of really bad reactions over the years when I have talked to people. And I found that one of the simplest, easiest things that I've ever heard is someone just respond back with, "Wow, I am so sorry." Acknowledging the pain that someone has gone through is a great place to start. Secondly, if you say the words, "I'm here to listen," those words are so powerful because us as survivors often feel like no one wants to hear us, no one wants to listen, our story doesn't matter, our voice has been stolen, why would we even talk about this? And so if you can say in words, "Hey, I am here to listen to you. I'm so sorry for what happened, and I'm here." that is a great place to take the conversation. Third simple and maybe the most validating statement you can make is, man, I can't imagine what you're going through. So often as people, we try to draw comparisons when we hear stories, and if you haven't gone through what they're talking about, don't try to pretend like you have. I've had friends, when I told them that I was raped, compare it to, oh, I know what you feel like. I felt that way when my boyfriend broke up with me in a situation that was not violent whatsoever. And that is so invalidating. It makes you feel like your story doesn't matter. It makes you feel like, why did I ever open my mouth in the first place? If instead of drawing comparisons, you can say, I can't imagine what you've gone through, because you can't. You weren't there, you're not them. That is a very, very validating thing to say and can be so helpful to hear as a survivor. If you then follow that up with a fourth statement of, I want to understand, that opens up the dialogue for them to explain further. So often, like I said, we feel like people want us to shut down. We feel like people don't want to listen to us. And so if you express to them clearly, hey, I can't imagine what you're going through, but I want to understand, so tell me. That is incredible to hear. In the moments when people said those things to me, I specifically remember those times because they made me want to sob, because I so desperately needed to hear those words. And then lastly, tell them that you're not going anywhere. If you can let someone know, hey, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I wasn't in your shoes. I'm here to listen. I want to understand, and I'm not going anywhere. That is an incredible way to begin a conversation. That's an incredible way to listen to someone, and then listen to their story, and then be there for them.
Okay. So again, straight from survivors, or something that can be said, actually verbalized, that can be helpful. To show empathy, you have to be able to listen, right? And we don't have to use these exact phrases, but it's important to be able to identify the emotion the person is describing and to let them lead the conversation. It sounds like you felt frustrated because that person didn't listen to you or let you finish what you had to say. I heard that you value efficiency and you value directness. How did that make you feel? You said that you were upset, but what does upset look like for you? Tell me more about when you said that you felt very confused. Tell me more about that situation. We don't want to tell people how they feel or why they feel that way. And sometimes when we identify people's emotions, we might get it wrong. What we think is furious might just be frustrated or hurt. If we're wrong, we need to be able to be patient with ourselves and the survivors and try to continue that conversation until we get it right, until we really do understand what they're telling us. The goal of empathy is not to offer solutions, but rather listen, connect, and let survivors feel heard. So we're going to go over a few aspects of communication that are important when talking to survivors, and making sure that we're practicing saying these things so that they sound comfortable and natural to us, right? I made these slides, so these things sound comfortable to say to me, but they might not, it might not be comfortable to say to you. There was a question that says, is it appropriate to say, it sounds like you're feeling X? Yeah, and then let them confirm or correct if that's actually what they're feeling. I think that's great. I heard you say that this was very upsetting. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? I'm going to repeat what you just said to make sure that I heard everything correctly. Especially with this last one, we want to make sure that we're adding context for some of our actions. So for example, if we're just repeating back to what a survivor is saying to them, that doesn't show that we're listening or processing what the survivor is telling us. It just shows that we're able to mimic. This might look like, I'm going to take notes so I can refer back to this conversation at a later date. Is that okay with you? You can view my notes before you leave if you would like. With this example, we're able to practice asking questions, providing context, and assisting them in identifying their options. Validation also feeds right into empathy. And I think someone just gave this example. I heard you say you felt scared. Those feelings are valid. That sounds really awful. There's no right way to deal with a situation. Everyone makes different choices. I haven't heard that before, but that doesn't make it any less true. It makes sense to me, and I believe you. We need to be able to validate survivors' decisions and experiences without judgment. Even when they ask what we think they should do, we should be redirecting that and saying something along the lines of, I can't tell you what to do, but I know you're going to make the best decision for yourself or decide what's best for you. We also need to be open and honest with survivors at the same time. If they ask questions we're not sure of, we need to be able to say, that's a good question. I don't know, but I'll follow up, or I've never heard that before, but it's still your experience and it's valid and I believe you. Validation might also involve combating victim blaming and self-blame when it happens. I believe you. I'm sorry that the other people in your life didn't. The only person to blame is the one that hurt you. It's not your fault. I'm not here to judge you. Remember that survivors may be blaming themselves for the violence that they experience, how they cope with it, and for other things as well, beyond what society and their social circles have blamed, faulted, ignored, or even supported the person that harmed them instead. It is the responsibility of sexual violence advocates to address victim blaming and rape myths with survivors. When addressing these rape myths and victim blaming, it may be helpful to identify how these attitudes are harmful and inaccurate, and also challenge these ideas with facts and data. We need to correct this once it happens, but also with the others around us, gently but firmly and clearly. We need to let survivors know that we're not going to judge them for what they've done or what they're doing. Instead, we should take these opportunities to uplift their different strengths. And we can do this by affirming survivors in different ways. I don't blame you for how you reacted. You did what you needed to do to survive. I've heard similar things from other survivors. Thank you for calling and sharing that with me. It can take a lot of courage to reach out and share your experience. Especially when survivors are being hypercritical, affirming them even in small ways can help them start to identify those strengths within themselves. But beyond just their identities, we can affirm their decisions or when they set a boundary or really any change or step they've made in their lives. Making room for silence. And this one is really important, I think, especially for us advocates who are used to having the answers and show that they care by being very responsive. Sometimes people just need a moment to regroup and think, so we need to be able to handle this response as a response and handle it well. Processing for some people just takes time. I want you to know that I'm comfortable with silence, so if it takes a few minutes to figure out where to start, that's okay. I have experience talking to people who are survivors of sexual violence. You can feel free to tell me as much or as little as you would like. What's coming up for you right now? What are you feeling? We have to also remember that trauma affects the way we process things too, so there may be silence or lack of eye contact. We need to become comfortable with both and figure out how to re-engage survivors in the conversation if there's been silence for a while. Additionally, we ourselves need to be comfortable with that silence and even take a moment to regroup and reground as well. And this one is similar when we're talking about options and resources to affirming survivors, but we also want to make sure that we're able to introduce different resources seamlessly. I can't tell you what to do, but we can go over your options together. That sounds like a difficult choice, but only you can decide for yourself. There are resources available should you want to talk at a later time. Again, we just need to make sure that we're presenting them as options, not as something survivors must do or as a guarantee of any sort. And of the resources that we're giving out, we need to make sure that they're vetted as well. And I've been alluding to some different strains, and these are just some of the ones that we've come up with, but there's lots of different strengths that people have that you can uplift for them. Not everyone is able to do what you did. It sounds like you accomplished being direct and following up today. That's great. Feeling supported and helping survivors recognize their strengths and resiliency can help them flex their own agency, power, and choices. So we reviewed all these different things to say, here are some things to avoid. Drinking more isn't the answer. Are you sure you've done everything you can? You just need to calm down. Last week, we talked about going outside more. It sounds like you're not doing that. All these phrases are accusatory and be interpreted as victim blaming statements, right? So we don't want to do this. We do not want to make excuses for the person that caused harm. None of these things are helpful, and they're not affirming to survivors or their healing journey. It's hurtful. So again, we don't want to blame survivors, and it is never their fault. Okay, so now that we reviewed some different verbal prompts to provide emotional support, we're going to invite our survivor speaker to share their story. So please hold all of your questions and comments till the end when they're done sharing. And I'm going to pause the recording now to maintain the survivor's confidentiality and privacy. So unfiltered and straight from survivors, what survivors actually want and what helps them feel better is to be believed, right? And so even if you don't take our word for it, believe survivors when they tell you what they need. Even if we say everything in the most perfect way, it still may not be the thing that helps the survivor feel better, but that support and that belief can be all the difference. A lot of times advocates feel when they just listen to survivors, they haven't helped them because that assistance isn't tangible or they haven't given them anything physically, but they really are. Empathetic listening is a skill, and it's not something that all people do well. Sometimes all survivors need is just for people to listen, not to give advice or options or to blame or to question, but just listen. So if you've attended any of our webinars in the past, you've probably seen this slide, but it's always relevant, so you'll probably continue to see it. In the simplest terms, this is how we provide emotional support to survivors. We believe them. Our job isn't to investigate if what they're saying is true. Our job is to assist them without judgment or doubt. We provide acceptance and understanding. We provide no judgment. We validate them in a different types of ways. We validate their identities, what they've gone through, what they've said. And of course, we listen. And just to give you all another resource, Marley has dropped a list of all those different empathetic phrases that we went over in the chat. So you all have that for reference as well. So we're about at the midway point. I don't see any questions and answers in the chat in the box right now, but please let me know if you all have them. So we're going to talk about safety planning. A safety plan is an individualized outline of how survivors can keep themselves and those they care about safe. It helps survivors know and quickly obtain what they need in that moment of crisis, but it also includes plans for long-term healing and grounding as well. Safety plans are also adaptable and fluid, and they should change as often as the circumstances in the survivor's life change. A lot of the times, safety planning is just thought of as a list of tangible items that can fit in a backpack, and that might work for some survivors who are leaving a currently physically violent situation. And this could include some tangible and non-tangible items, right? But what about that when the place that a survivor feels unsafe is their own body or mind, or when they're alone? What if the thing that's hurting them most is their memories? So with that in mind, we have to throw away our traditional idea of a safety plan, especially when it comes to survivors of sexual violence. So now we're gonna watch a video, another video about triggers.
There's always still, it's been 3 years, and there's a part of my brain that's always trying not to think about the rape in my everyday life.
To me, it was a trauma, and it's a trauma that will have permanent impacts on my life.
Strangely, my main trigger is getting unknown phone calls, because when I was dealing with the legalities of my specific case, I would get these unknown calls, which was from my attacker trying to contact me personally. And so now whenever I get unknown numbers from work, I never pick them up, which is annoying because, you know, I need them for work.
There was, when I was living in Brighton just after I was raped, a guy who worked in the supermarket who had the exact same haircut as the person who attacked me, and I basically just didn't go shopping for a while. I avoided it.
Various things trigger that, one of them being that this person is often or sometimes kind of on TV. That obviously is a trigger, but that's a direct reminder, and that really annoys me. I want to sort of throw things at the TV that this person is still given a platform.
There are lots of really small things that still set me off. It can be seeing a particular kind of bedspread, it can be certain kinds of road, you know, just really small details that trigger the memory, and suddenly I'm back there feeling traumatized again.
It's more a sense of sadness and loss about what I lost as a result of the assault. So I'm 38 now, and so a lot of my friends are, you know, married and have kids, and they bought property and all these things. And like, I'm not at that point in my life yet, because my whole life got derailed by this one kind of event, and I've spent the rest of my life trying to get back onto that track.
I find myself, when I'm walking in the streets alone at night, I find myself getting very frightened about, you know, what if someone were to come and attack me? And so I find myself armoring physically against that.
Being alone in places at night, walking home from nights out, I don't necessarily.
Okay. So we're going to expand on the neurobiology of triggers for just a second. Triggers happen when survivors experience a perceived threat. And this can really, like they described in the video, this can be anything, and it's different for every survivor. Something reminds them of their experience. So the brain thinks that they are in danger, which engages that sympathetic fight or flight response all over again. This can be even worse than the original experience, because you may be triggered at any time, and survivors may not know what triggered them. Some people may experience flashbacks or relive their traumatic experience. Others might not be aware of that they were triggered, and they might just say they don't know what happened, their body just reacted. And that's totally real for them. An example may be a survivor being told by a doctor to just relax before a pelvic exam. They might be triggered because the person that harmed them said that while sexually assaulting them, even if they are not in danger at the moment. Some possible triggers may be sensory experiences like noises, smells, touch, sights, and sounds. And during a traumatic event, memories aren't always able to add context to those sensory experiences. So that's why that happens. This can lead to those different smells triggering someone into a flashback. It can be different places. It can be dates or anniversaries. Interpersonal relationships can also be triggering because they can inadvertently activate the fight or flight response when there are different power imbalances. And that's why it's so important for us as advocates and those who are working with survivors to make sure that we aren't recreating new power imbalances. And trigger planning is a key part of emotional safety planning. And it helps survivors rewire their response when they are triggered. Emotional safety planning is about helping a survivor come back to that regulated state. Even if they're just feeling a little sad or anxious, Emotional safety planning can still help them self-soothe and continue on their healing journey. This is why it's so important to have quick grounding exercises to explore with survivors, but also to have knowledge of more long-term healing modalities. Emotional/trigger planning is especially important for survivors of sexual violence. So we're going to review some different sample questions for emotional safety planning, but please note that we do not want advocates to print these questions out and turn them into a worksheet. We really mean what we say when we say safety planning needs to be individualized and are unique for every survivor. Whatever it needs might not be the same as what Quinn needs, so they each should have different questions and prompts for their emotional safety plans. Additionally, these questions are vague for that same purpose, so survivors can interpret them in a way that is helpful and it makes it accessible and personable for them. We also need to let survivors know that even if they follow their safety plan down to the letter, they can still get triggered or it just might not work. Safety plans are not foolproof solutions, but they do give survivors tools to work through situations when they happen. And so Marley is going to drop another resource in the chat. Again, if you do the evaluation, you will have access to all these resources and a copy of the slides. What does safety mean to you? What do you need to feel physically safe? And this, for some people, might be medications, it can be fidgets, it could be a cell phone, it could be a blanket. The survivor speaker, when we were talking earlier in the tech check, was telling us about, I believe it was buzzers and bracelets that could be helpful for survivors to have, especially if they're in court and they don't want to take out their smells, just like sniff those while on the stand. That might not be great, right? But if they can have something that they can do in their lap, that could be really helpful. What information do you need to feel safe? How is that affected by different environments? So for some survivors, they might say, I need to know where the exits are, or I need to know who to contact in the case of an emergency, or I need to know the side effects of each medication I'm prescribed. Again, this may change depending on if it's a safe versus unsafe environment or a new versus familiar environment. What do others need to know about you to help you feel safe? I need them to know not to touch me, right? I need them to know that I need my emotional support animal. Or don't take me to this place because I had a bad experience if I need support. Again, each survivor's needs are going to be unique and different depending on what situation they're facing. And I think Marley is going to put that resource. Oh, she already did. Thanks, Marley. Sometimes survivors may not know exactly what triggers them, so figuring that out could be a part of their individual safety plan, along with how to respond to those triggers safely. What triggers you? How can you tell when you feel triggered? What helps you work through those triggers? When talking about things like triggers, we also need to be able to describe them in a way that's accessible to survivors. So instead of saying, what triggers you, maybe we say, what makes you feel unsafe? Or you said you felt out of control of your body during your last flashback. What were those sensations that you felt? Where did you feel them? How do you overcome this feeling of being unsafe? Knowing how to rephrase these different questions for survivors is very helpful. We should also be able to help survivors identify what makes them feel safe, also known as their protective factors, in their environments as well. Without realizing their already developed coping skills or supports, it will be much harder for survivors to identify what works for them when it comes to grounding and long-term healing. What helps you feel calm? What are some of the things that you do to calm yourself down when you feel dysregulated? Who are your safe people? How should you contact them and when? Just like when situations change, the safe or supportive people might change depending on what situation is occurring. And so Marley's going to put another resource in the chat that is helpful when it comes to emotional safety planning. Grounding is about helping survivors come back to the present and re-engage those senses. A little bit more about the neurobiology. When we're talking about trauma, we're trying to regulate and not over-engage the sympathetic nervous system or our hot brain so that our body isn't always responding to different triggers as being actively in danger. And for some survivors, this can be a completely new experience. So we need to have language ready to discuss grounding and safety planning. There's this quick activity I know that has helped other survivors. Would you like to try it? I'm glad you found something that helps you feel better. Do you want to practice that now with me? Feeling okay again after being triggered can be difficult. Safety plans are not foolproof, but they can be helpful. We also need to be ready to help survivors try multiple grounding tools till they're able to find some that works for them. And of course, we wouldn't just tell you all to help survivors find what works for them without giving you some examples and some tools. So we're now going to go through and practice some different grounding exercises together that you can use with survivors. Okay, so now we're going to watch another video. And this one is specifically from the Arizona Trauma Institute. And they have a whole playlist of different videos that specifically talk about breathing.
So an extension from the last activity is going to be to breathe in self-compassion. Again, you want to start these type of breathing activities after you've already gone through a first cycle of counting breathing or relaxation breathing, because these require the prefrontal cortex to be online. But they're very useful as you're moving the transition from the initial calming down into a more calculated and compassionate type of calming down. So the idea with this exercise is that you're going to use code words to condition new responses. And then you can start to use the code words when you're triggered. And that means a physiological triggering. So once you notice that something's going on in your body, your breathing might be increasing or becoming shallow, you can use these code words to trigger the new physiological response that you've conditioned with your body into the new breathing. So the idea is that you take the words and you use the breath with the words. So you breathe in safety and security. Again, you exhale. The next one is to breathe in kindness and let it spread through your whole body. The next one is to savor the feeling of love. And the fourth one is to breathe in your own goodness. So again, we'll just go through them one more time. The first one is to breathe in safety and security. The second one is to breathe in kindness and make sure you're letting it spread through the whole of the body. The next breath in is going to be to savor the feeling of love. And the last one is going to be to breathe in your own goodness.
Okay. So again, they have a whole playlist of different videos that you can go through and play with survivors that really focus on breathing. This one is another one called Making a List. So, and I also included like some verbal prompts on here that you can use. One coping tool that helps survivors when they're feeling triggered is making a list. What are some categories that you can list off the top of your head? So it can be whatever the survivor wants to do. It could be state capitals because there's a lot of them, books, cars, shows, movies, whatever it is that they're able to list, right? And the more they go through that list, they might be able to notice that their breathing has slowed down because they're able to focus on something else and really re-engage and be in the present of thinking through that list instead of their triggers. The next one is finding squares. And I particularly picked this picture because there is a lot of squares here, but take a look around your environment and count how many squares you can find. How many do you see? And if they're able to say like 2 or 3, then you can ask more questions. What about on the floor? On the wall? Try focusing on finding squares until you feel your heart slowing down or your breathing slowing down. And it can really be any shape, but we know that there is usually a lot of squares in our different environments, so they should be easy to find. And again, engaging our visual sense. Focus objects. Try to find something in the room you're in and focus on it. Please describe this to me in as much detail as possible. And this one can work if we're doing that virtual advocacy, right? Because the survivor can describe whatever it is. It doesn't really matter in as much detail as possible. And you don't have to see it for it to work. And this one, again, in particular, is engaging that visual sense to help survivors stay present. This one is 5 senses. So look around your environment and see if you can find 5 items you can see, 4 items you can feel, 3 items you can hear, 2 items you can smell, and 1 item you can taste. Can you describe it to me? And this one can be adjusted however you all see fit. If you don't have anything that you can taste or smell or hear, take it out. Take the numbers down so it doesn't have to be 5. It can be 1 for each. It can be adjusted and adapted as needed to for survivors. And here are some other grounding tools that could be helpful for survivors. So the Calm app in particular has a lot of different meditation and breathing exercises that you can do. You do have to pay for some of them, but I believe some of them are also free. Survivors can also create their own personal grounding toolkit, and Marley is going to go ahead and drop that resource in the chat. We made one already, so if you're looking for one, we have that for you. You can also invest in fidgets, and there's a picture of what a fidget could be on the slide, but fidgets can really be anything that you can hold in your hand and kind of move around to focus that way. And then you can also do affirmations. These things don't have to be fancy or expensive. In SVCAT, and that is our sexual violence core advocacy training, we do an activity where we ask participants to make their own grounding toolkit in 10 minutes out of objects that are in their household office, or in their environment. A fidget can be anything like jewelry. So if you wear a necklace or a watch or a bracelet, it can be a rubber band, it can be a pen. It's really up to the survivors. Affirmations can be another grounding tool. So for one survivor I know, their therapist told them that when they feel triggered, to start listing out verbally some facts they know about themselves. So it could be like, my name is Lachey Brown. I was born on April 3rd in Honolulu, Hawaii. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. I currently live in Phoenix, Arizona, and listing off as many facts as they can until they start to feel themselves become back regulated. Another grounding tool is to have your own personal affirmations. So I'm going to read mine to you all to show that we actually believe and use the things that we say. So mine say, I am loved, I am enough, I am blessed. I am needed, I am wanted, I am powerful, I am intelligent. I deserve to be respected, listened to, and appreciated. My boundaries are there to keep me safe. I will thrive, right? So again, the affirmations could be whatever it is that is personable to you, but it can be very helpful for survivors. Let's see. If our survivor speaker is still there, they want to share a grounding tool that they use. So if you are still there, a survivor speaker, you can feel free to unmute yourselves and share that one, because I don't want to describe it incorrectly.
Hi. Yes, the tool that I wanted to suggest is the tool that is used, is the buzzers that they use in counseling for doing EMDR. Although you are not going to use them for EMDR, these buzzers, you typically, either they are two little things that you put in your hands, in the palms of your hands, and what they do is just vibrate one after the other one after the other one. And what it does is just regulate the brain to ground yourself and just calm down and be able to express yourself. As I'm saying, it can be something that you put in the palms of your hands. Also, there are some that you use them as bracelets. So you put the bracelet either in the ankles of your feet, or you put them in your wrist on your hands, or in the pockets of your pants, in each side of the pockets of your pants. And what they do is just regulate the survivor so that they are able to express themselves. And this is especially important if they are being forensic interviewed, if they are in court, if they are creating an order of protection or a petition or something in court, because it helps them ground themselves. So having that even in your practice, when you are seeing survivors, it's just good for you to have that to ground them so that they're able to speak and they are able to listen what they are saying. Because as I'm saying before, many times it's just a survival mechanism for your brain. And what your brain does is that you are there, but you are not actually present. Your mind is somewhere else. So you have to ground yourself in order to receive everything you're saying and everything that she needs to be doing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so that is, again, just another tool that we can use for survivors. And for some survivors, it might be helpful to write down that safety plan that they came up with so they can take it with them wherever they go. When I feel triggered, I can do 5 quick deep breaths to help me feel calm right away. I know that I can contact my partner and they will help me feel grounded again. I know that I can put my tongue at the roof of my mouth for 10 seconds, and that will help me ground myself. I need space in order for me to feel safe. And those are just examples. So this isn't a comprehensive list, and it is going to be different for every survivor, but this could be a starting place for survivors who want to form their own safety plan and have some objects to put for that safety plan. But for it to work for survivors, it has to be custom fit for them. So now we're going to transition into long-term grounding and healing. We define healing as the process of making or becoming sound or healthy again. Just like everyone's sexual violence experience is different, just like everyone experiences their traumas and triggers differently, everyone's healing journey is also going to look different. Advocates need to affirm that healing isn't a straightforward process. It's not about reaching a certain point and declaring that they're done being hurt. Healing is about finding relief and peace for themselves. So it's not a race. It's not even really a marathon. It's more like a nature hike. And I don't hike, so that's saying something. It's about the journey and finding that calmness. Advocates and survivors should be patient when exploring these different healing methods because, like grounding, you're going to have to work to find out what works for you. So we're going to revisit the neurobiology really quickly, but we're going to focus on healing for this one. There are a few different ways to regulate the nervous system that could be useful for survivors. So this one is called top-down regulation. This is strengthening your mind's capacity to monitor your bodily sensations. Basically, if we know what we feel in our bodies, we can begin to understand why. So that's why in the beginning, we spent so much time focusing on those sensations that we feel in our bodies as advocates. So for example, we have this gut feeling about something, but why do we have that feeling? We might call it intuition, but it's probably based on a past experience that I'm being reminded of, and my body recognizes that situation. Maybe I met a new person and I have a gut feeling about them. If I explore that gut feeling a little bit more, I might realize that that feeling is because they remind me of a person who broke my heart a long time ago. This realization allows me to separate my gut feeling from the new person and understand where it's coming from. So some examples of top-down regulation are mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. Okay, the dot is not moving. It's supposed, oh, there we go. Okay. Bottom-up regulation, on the other hand, is about resetting our autonomic nervous system. It helps us leave fight or flight mode when we become triggered and changes our brains to become less likely to shift into fight or flight. Breathing is regulated by that autonomic nervous system, and it's a great way to reset the A and S when we become dysregulated. Breathing in engages that sympathetic nervous system, and breathing out engages the parasympathetic nervous system. So breathing in engages our hot brain, and breathing out engages our cool brain. This is why we want to do breathing exercise that focus on the out breath. The out breath should be longer than the in breath. And these different things and bottom up regulation can be things like a trauma-informed massage, and this can be a good way to relearn how to feel in your body. And yoga is also mentioned here because it also helps with bottom-up regulation. Another form is attuning to others, and this helps strengthen our mirror neurons. And this is our empathy center, and it helps us relearn how to form relationships with each other. So doing rhythmic group activities requires us to learn to be in sync with others. So like to do music, we need to learn to listen to each other. So I'm not sure, but has anyone been able to watch the new Selena series on Netflix? I promise this is relevant. Some folks are saying yes. Okay. Well, in that series, for those of you who haven't watched it, there's a part early on when Selena's dad is telling her sister that she's the drummer, and he's saying that you can't just listen to yourself. You have to be a part of the band. You all have to blend together. And that is the same thing when we're talking about attuning to others, right? With music, if one person is not listening to others, right, then the sound is probably going to be off. We have to make sure that we're together and in the same rhythm for the music to sound good. And so attuning to others can be things like music groups or choir, dance, or theater. Healing can be especially difficult for survivors, especially if they're finding it difficult to measure their healing process. We can say things like, healing takes time and it looks different for everyone. Healing is a process, and it may take trying a couple of things for you to figure out what works for you. What are some things that help you feel better or feel less stress? We need to be able to affirm all the ways survivors progress, no matter how small, but also validate those possible feelings of despair, anger, and frustration. Areas of hurt and areas of healing. So each part of someone's being can and are connected to each other and also affect how people heal. And we didn't come up with this. This is actually from the Research Sharing Project. And just like we are the TA providers for the domestic and sexual violence programs within Arizona, they are our national TA provider. So I've drafted up some questions for you all to help survivors identify what might help them in their healing journeys. So for heart and mind, what would help the survivor feel safe and grounded in their own body? What would help them find peace in their healing journey? Body, what are some resources that can help survivors meet their physical needs? What would help them feel more comfortable or in tune with their body? For spirit, what resources will help survivors feel more connected to or repair their relationship with their spirituality? Sexuality, what will help the survivor feel more comfortable and in tune with their sexuality? What are some ways that survivors can express their sexuality in a healthy way? And then relationships. What will help the survivor feel more connected socially? What resources can help survivors build and repair relationships after trauma? In reality, sexual violence really does have an impact on all these different aspects of a person's life, and these traumatic impacts influence each other. So for example, if someone's spirituality is being impacted by their sexual violence experience, it makes sense that there may be some disruption in their relationships and in their emotions or their heart and mind. If someone is experiencing pain in their body, that might impact their sexuality. If someone's sexual relationship is affected, then that can also impact their personal relationships or their relationships that they have with sexuality when they're exploring that within themselves. Or if someone who is sexually assaulted feels physically vulnerable, they might start working out excessively, right? Which can have impacts on their sexual health and their physical health. So we have to stop thinking of these different impacts in these areas of hurt and healing as separate things and really look at how the impacts that they have together. Okay, so for heart and mind, some areas of healing could be things like journaling, drawing, reading, singing. That's a signing, I apologize. Puzzles, counseling, pottery, and metalwork. A good place to start in this category is to ask the survivor to think about things that help them focus on their heartbeat and their breathing. For body, it could be things like exercise, trauma-informed yoga, horseback riding, walking. This can also be things directly related to the sexual violence experience, like taking care of their medical care, but can also be things that will help them meet their bodily needs like food, shelter, and water resources, and getting them connected to an exercise regime that works for them. For spirituality, it could be meditating, praying, or connecting with their faith or belief system. This one in particular is really dependent on who the survivor is. And I heard this quote from a National Clearinghouse webinar, and the speaker's name was Latrice Buck, and she said, "You do not have to be religious to understand someone's need for religion." And I just want to emphasize that someone's relationship with their faith can really influence their healing journey. For sexuality, it can be flirting, sending pictures, reading erotica, watching healthy pornography, sexual activities, and dating. And this can also be things like exploring their feelings about their body image or working on how to express their sexuality. And we really wanted to focus things that weren't specific sex acts because sexuality encompasses a range of different acts and experiences and feelings. And then relationships. That can be talking on the phone, video chatting, joining Facebook groups, joining a sexual violence support group, going to different events, or getting a pen pal, right? Engaging with others. And each of these things involve multiple aspects of each other, but they also require that the doer or the survivor to be engaged and as engaged as they want to be to complete these tasks. And this is an extension of the idea of being present that is the foundation for grounding. Again, each of these topics that are on the slide right now could be their own separate webinars, but these are some things that you might want to discuss with survivors who want to further their healing journey with talking about long-term emotional support. It can be setting boundaries, starting new relationships or ending relationships, healthy communication, healthy body image, and reclaiming sexuality and pleasure. Whenever the survivor is ready to talk about these topics, we also need to have the tools and be ready to discuss them as well. It is important for advocates to be knowledgeable about the different types of healing modalities and where survivors can go to receive them. So some questions we might want to think about are, what resources do we know that offer these different healing modalities? Are they trauma informed? How much do they cost? Is there a discounted rate for us? Can we set up a memorandum of understanding or an MOU with them? Because healing is so individualized, we might not need to take all those formal steps, but we need to utilize different resources, including staff strengths and resources to meet the needs of survivors. So maybe someone on staff is really into gardening and they have some seeds, and we can put that outside of our office and do some gardening while we're talking about healing with survivors. Maybe someone is really good at puzzles, and we can do a puzzle night or a virtual puzzle night in our support groups, right? Just some different ideas that we can check out. So now we're going to practice a different activity that survivors can use to track their own healing. So I'm going to ask you all, and I'll give you a moment, to gather a writing utensil and something to write on. Okay, so the first prompt is, and I would like you to write this down, I am, and describe yourself in one word. I am whatever you are. I have been, describe yourself in one action or word. I choose, or I will be, whatever it is that you want to be moving forward. So I am strong. I have been ignored, and I choose to be loud and heard moving forward, right? And it can be whatever you describe it to be, but this activity allows for survivors to frame where they are in their progress on the healing journey. And it can help ground them in the moment when they're feeling triggered. It's short, it can be modified, and it can be repeated if saying it once doesn't help that person come back to a regulated state. Again, this can also be turned into something that is a journal prompt as well. So they can track this over their progress over months, years, days, whatever works for them. So we are almost at time. So we're not going to be able to do, unfortunately, all the scenarios today, but we could go through one. Okay. So I'm going to read the scenario, and in the chat, please respond how you would if someone said these things to you. Every time I go to the grocery store now, I find myself being felt up all over again. I know they're not going to be there, but I get really anxious and my hands start to shake. Last time I had a full-blown panic attack and they had to call the ambulance. I'm so embarrassed. I wish I could just get over it, but I can't. So how would you respond to a survivor who said this? Your feelings are valid. I understand. That must have been awful. Would it help if someone went with you to the grocery store? Okay. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Sorry that happened to you. You're so brave. Yeah, I think those are all great response. I'm so sorry that you keep getting triggered. What do you need from me? Yeah, so I think those are all really great responses. I also like that someone offered something that might help as well, but we really want to make sure that at first we're just taking that time to just listen to what they are saying, right? And also validating their experience and what's happening to them. Your body was responding, not your choice. Absolutely, right? Talking about that triggered. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. That validation, you all got it. I think we have time to do one more. It still really bothers me that my mother didn't believe me when it first happened. Our relationship has been strained since, especially since she keeps asking me when I'm going to start a family with my wife. Now that she's gone, I find myself still angry with her. Does that make sense? Absolutely. I'm sorry that your mother did not believe you. Yes, you have a right to your own feelings. I can't imagine how hurtful that must have been. What happened to you and the way you feel as a result of it are real. That's also a really good response. It sounds like to me this person might be dealing with both grief and anger, right? And that's very real for a lot of survivors, especially older survivors who might not be able to find that accountability if that person that harmed them is no longer alive. So we just got to think about these different things that survivors might feel and how we would provide those emotional support for things like grief, for things like anger, some of these emotions that we might not be as comfortable with. So these are some other resources that didn't really fit in any other slides, but I still wanted you all to have them. They're really good. They're very comprehensive, and I would encourage you all to check them out. So with that being said, that is the end of the webinar for today. So if there is any questions, please put them in the chat box now and we will go over them. But thank you all for coming. And please make sure that you do the evaluation. Marley is going to put it in the chat now, but I want to pause here before I go to the slide that explains how to get your certificate. Okay, so I'm gonna stop recording now, but again, thank you all so much for coming. And that is the end of the presentation.